preparedness program and grant that the city's been participating in. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. So just for the purpose of introductions, we've got some elected officials with us today from the city. So Mayor Gove's here and Councilor Rinaldi. And we were hoping for Pam Gilday. Pam, are you here? Nope. Okay. Any other city councilors? Okay. We've also got residents in our core team, folks. So the core team is, we've got people who are identified early on to help us with the MVP program, who joined us to work as volunteers. So if everybody on the core team could quickly introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Alan Corey.
Michael Jewell.
Robert Damaris.
I'm Corey Riley.
And we got John Lopez, who is our conservation agent, who also works for the department.
Bob Prokop, Merrimack Conservation.
Thank you, Bob. We've also got some folks, hopefully from the Merrimack River Watershed Council. Hopefully they're joining us too. They've got a lot of concerns about the river. I want to thank the core team for getting this whole thing together. This has been sort of a fit and start kind of thing as we sort of work through the COVID-19, trying to do these things remotely. Our admin staff over at City Hall, Kristen Eldridge, really put a hard effort in to get the word out, get these letters out to everybody. She actually hand-delivered a bunch of envelopes yesterday for us. So big shout out to her for helping us out. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the mayor with some introductory remarks and go from there.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to everyone who's on the core team and has been working on this. Nice to meet some of you virtually here. Thanks for joining us and attending this Zoom meeting. This is sort of our new reality. Lots of virtual meetings have been held over the last few weeks here. So regarding tonight's topic, having participated in Amesbury's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Community Resiliency Workshop and planning process about a year ago, I am very pleased to be here tonight and to support this ongoing effort to create greater resiliency and to our changing climate in Amesbury. We all know that the banks of the Merrimack River are experiencing increasing problems with erosion, and that properties in the roadway itself are experiencing flooding and erosion as well. So I think, fortunately, we have been thinking proactively about how to address these problems, thanks to having Tom on staff, and the team that he works with. So I would like to, welcome BSC Group, who will be presenting ideas for us and how to get ahead of the significant erosion and flooding issues that Pleasant Valley Road residents are coping with. BSC, as well as members of our city staff, are here to help answer your questions and listen to your comments following the presentation, and I'm going to stick around for as long as I can to observe and listen as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mayor. So going back to the past a little bit, as the mayor indicated, about a year ago, we did our resiliency workshop. And in doing that, we sort of set the stage for being able to accept grant money from the state. And we actually won the largest grant for the North Shore to put on that workshop, which we're very happy with, because again, we're not coastal like a Newburyport, we're kind of a little bit inland, but we're definitely affected by storm surge, the Merrimack River, as well as all the way inside to the downtown. For those of you who were around during the Mother's Day flood, I'll remember that. And everything around Amesbury is really water related. We've got multiple lakes, we've got multiple rivers, everything sort of comes in and funnels through the downtown. So we really need to be cognizant of the changing climate and be aware of conditions both along our shorelines as well as inland. In particular, the wetlands, flood storage areas like Woodson Farm, other wetland areas that we seek to protect through the Conservation Commission and open space. Our first action grant, so the process for this is you become a designated MVP community. Then you start to move through action grants based on the analysis that we did during that workshop. So the mayor was there, Corey Riley was there, DPW Director Rob Desmaris was there. Alan, I think you were there. I think Dave, you showed up too, Mr. Frick. And we came up with a laundry list of things that we wanted to look at and tackle. And so open space was the first project that we did. We won a grant for that recently, and we actually completed that project with the Open Space Committee. And our sort of second action grant that we're trying to tee up is related to Pleasant Valley Road. So the erosion issues, the fact that we've got infrastructure that runs through Pleasant Valley Road, and if we lose that component, we lose a connection to the rest of Amesbury, and we lose infrastructure that's valuable to the city, and we don't want that to happen. So we need to come up with some sort of plan that will buffer that section of the city from that kind of erosion and make sure that we can continue to travel that way and make sure services don't get interrupted. Also, Town of Merrimack indicated that they were here. We've had some conversations with them in trying to join forces with us because they've already lost their roadway that continues on from Pleasant Valley Road. Hopefully in the future, they will get designated an MVP community, and we can then move towards maybe doing some joint projects. Because again, you know, water doesn't know the technical boundary of where the city of Amesbury starts and where Merrimack begins. So the Merrimack flows, the Merrimack's going to do what it wants to do. So the lakes, streams, and wetlands. So we're all linked by these different waterways. So with that, I think we'll open it up with Jillian, so you can start to explain kind of where we're going with this process.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. So I figured the first thing I do is show, I can share my screen. I'm going to share a few different things. The first thing I'm going to share is a couple of maps that show the proposed project area. And our idea is that we will start with a section of the riverbank and a section of the road, but as time goes on, we can expand it to a larger area. But for now, and I'm going to hit share and
nice background, Jillian.
Oh, thanks. All right, and so now hopefully you can see an aerial photo with lot lines on it and then a red line showing a number of properties. Is that showing up, everybody?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
So this aerial photo, the red line outlines the section of the Merrimack Riverbank that we identified last year during the MVP process and the Natural Resources Infrastructure Assessment as having some really significant erosion. There's erosion in other areas as well, but this is a substantial stretch that we can propose a project for through the Action Grant Program. So these would be the properties that are affected. And now I'm going to share my, I'm going to do a stop share and then share again to show the other location. Okay, and now this aerial photo shows a stretch of roadway that was identified during the MVP process last year that already experiences significant flooding. Never mind what's going to happen as climate change advances. And the reason that we chose the lots that are within the red line here is that we wanted to look at that particular stretch of roadway, the land between the road and the river, but also there's I think there's a culvert there. The land behind the road on the inland side has a lot of natural cover, and those lots may have potential for nature-based solutions, which we'll talk about more. So we're thinking about not just where the problem is, but some potential areas to think about for solutions. So that just goes over which area we're talking about. And now I'm once again going to stop sharing and share again. And this, you may have had time or you may not have had time to take a look at the story map for, let's see, for Amesbury. And so I'm just, so we put together this story map to help explain the idea behind this project, and that started out with the recognition of the problems along Pleasant Valley Road, and understanding that those problems are just going to get worse as we experience more severe flooding, more severe storm events, increased sea level rise, and storm surge, which, because the Merrimack in this area is still tidal, those have an impact as well. And this is a cover of the Natural Resources Infrastructure Assessment report that we did last year, and that should be available on the city website. And as Tom mentioned, this thinking and attention paid to these problems comes out of that community-driven MVP process, where some of you may have been part of that, or you may have community members, including Mayor Gove, who were part of that process. And this issue in town got a very high rating in terms of something that should be addressed in the near future. And if you want to find out more about the MVP program, you can go to this website. The EEA, Executive Office of Environmental Affairs for Massachusetts, is supporting this program. And the action grant would actually have the two components. One is the riverbank restoration, and the other is starting to look at ways to evaluate and address the flooding on the road. In order to be successful with our grant application, we need to have written permission from every property owner who is within the project area to saying that the property owner generally supports going forward with this type of a project, and that you grant permission for us to go onto your property for data collection purposes, that we need to conduct these studies. And you saw the cover letter mentioned that, and then there was, yes, Tom is holding up the template letter that you could send, and hopefully you will. And so these are just a few of the pictures of the problem. You can see how severe the erosion is, and those folks up in the upper right corner, the legs that you see there and partial bodies, they are standing on the road. So this erosion is imminently threatening the road, and the ice dams in the winter, they exacerbate the erosion. And I'm sure you've all experienced some of the road flooding that has been happening with some of the more severe storms in town. And so some of the questions that I think a lot of citizens have been asking is will this road even be accessible in 2030 or 2050 or beyond? And what are we going to be doing if the road starts to flood even more than it is? What about emergency access? What about accessing your property if there are severe floods? And so the study area for the riverbank restoration is between Buttonwood Road and Skunk Road. And the studies that we need to do are, some of them are going to be on the aquatic side. And today we have Nick Nelson with us from Interfluve. So Interfluve would partner with BSC because they're experts more on that aquatic side, and they would be looking at, they would be modeling some river flow velocities, doing bathymetry for the bottom of the riverbed, and then we would be doing, so there'd be a bathymetric survey, there would be a landside survey that we at BSC would do to understand the topography. And then we would also look at the composition of the bank and its erodibility, its current level of erosion. And then the approach that MVP supports, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program supports, is one that relies on nature-based solutions. So this is a really wonderful source of grant money, but they have requirements for the projects that they are willing to fund. And the projects need to be oriented to creating more resiliency to the climate threats that communities face. And they need a strong emphasis with nature-based solutions and green infrastructure and things that offer, and the reason for that is nature-based solutions more often than not offer a lot of co-benefits. So you get more bang for your buck when you invest the money in that way. And this obviously, to fully complete the project, it's going to take more than 1 year. But the funding is on a fiscal year basis. So this year's proposal submission would just be for the first year's worth of work. So we thought we'd just kind of run through the different years and what they would look like. So the first year is these field studies and surveys, some online assessment using digital mapping, digital resources, and developing some conceptual designs for riverbank restoration, coming up with the listing of the permits that would be needed, figuring out some costs and a timeline. And throughout this, there would be ongoing public engagement and education, because you, the community, are essential to this. This is on private property. It affects your lives, and the reason for doing it is to add to your community's climate resiliency and improved well-being and public safety. This photograph here is a photograph of banks, a bank stabilization and restoration project that has already been completed in Haverhill, Massachusetts, on the Merrimack River. And this is showing a nature-based solution. What you see here is that although the toe slope is riprap to help with some of the force of the waves, that the slope itself has been restored with native vegetation, because in the long run, that's a better solution. If you do just a seawall type hard structure there, what you're going to do is ricochet the wave power off of this location, and it's going to impact another location further down, causing even more erosion. So it just passes the buck. It doesn't actually solve the problem. And then the other, this is a photograph here of this road section that floods. So part 2 is starting to look at the flooding problems on the road with sort of a pilot study area of this one particular spot. So that involves a feasibility study, considering different alternatives for how to approach the problem, and looking at different climate scenarios and what's expected in the coming decades. And then again, community outreach and education is going to be essential. We're going to be looking at predictions for the future storm surge and sea level rise. And these are the 2 areas again. So we do know that a parcel by parcel solution will not ultimately work. So if each homeowner tries on their own to solve the problem, it's just not likely to succeed. We really need a cooperative, community-based solution, and hopefully you can get those letters of permission in. The grant application is due June 11th, but we have a lot of work to prepare the application, and so the sooner the letters come in, the more helpful that is to us in terms of preparing the proposal itself. And so we thought we would share also some downscaled climate assessments that Massachusetts has been able to take. You know, we've all heard about the global predictions, but how does it play out on the ground in communities? And happily, the science has gotten to the point where Massachusetts has been able to downscale that climate data by watershed. So the Merrimack watershed is going to see a increase of days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Currently, from 21 days, by 2030, it'll be about 26 days. Whereas the days below freezing will go from a current 130 days to a future 117. And we'll see precipitation increases largely in the winter and spring, but even also in the summer and the fall. And I just also want to show these graphs. If you look at where we were at just the year 2000, which for those of us who are maybe a little bit past college, it seems like just yesterday that it was the year 2000. But you can see how much the temperature has increased, and the number of days above 90 degrees used to only be 8 days in 2000, and now we're over 20. And days below freezing used to be in 2000 148, and now it's down to 130 and heading even lower. So we're experiencing some really significant change already, and will be in the next 10 years. This is a graphic we did last year for the MVP project. What about further into the century in 2090? Those changes are even more dramatic. Days over 90 degrees goes from 21 to 82. Below freezing days go from 130 to 78. And again, increased precipitation, which we're seeing increases in the heavy precipitation too. This is the current 100-year FEMA flood map. And we know that that is based on historical data. It's no longer accurate, that the flood footprint extends beyond what's currently shown. 500-year storms are becoming more prevalent with more intense storm surges that impact the bank scarification. Simultaneously, we're also seeing more frequency of drought, and that could also destabilize the bank because drought can kill off the vegetation and it can dry the soils out. And if you get a severe storm and the soils are really dry, they actually erode more easily initially. And this is the 100-year flood with the 500-year flood shown on it as well. And these are the two potential project areas. This map also we did during the MVP project last year. This is a hurricane storm surge map, and the different colors signify different categories of hurricanes, as you can see in the bottom here. And so these areas that we're looking at really have the potential to be hammered hard during hurricanes. So what is storm surge? Storm surge is an abnormal rise of water that's generated by a storm and that goes above and beyond the normal tidal heights. And it can lead to saltwater flooding very far inland from the coast. And so these storm surge maps can show the neighborhoods that are potentially vulnerable to that. And you'll notice storm surge goes all the way up into downtown Amesbury and even up the back river a bit. And here's a close-up of those storm surge maps for the two potential project areas. And this is what the MVP page looks like on the website, so feel free to check that out some more. This is a map that we did for the Natural Resources Infrastructure Assessment last year, the Ecological Climate Resiliency Map. That this mapping system evaluates where on the landscape we have the best ecological climate resiliency that then helps buffer and protect the community. So you can see that a strength is these naturally vegetated areas. They can help store floodwaters, provide cooling, and mitigate, help with water quality and water quantity during drought. So, and you'll also notice that the Woodsum Farm area scores very, very high for that. And it helps store floodwaters that would, if they weren't being stored on the landscape, they would come in a higher peak flow during the big events right through downtown. So this area up here helps protect your downtown area. As Tom mentioned, this year's MVP project for Amesbury is an open space and recreation plan update, which is proceeding very well. The natural resources infrastructure inventory happened last year, or assessment. And there's a link on the story map where you can explore nature-based solutions some more if you want some more information about that. And so now I'm going to unshare that. And I have one more thing to share with you all, and then we can get into discussion and questions. So let's see, here we go. Share. Okay, so this is a little bit more detail on what these projects would look like. This column is the riverbank restoration column, and this is the road flooding and road future column. So for year one, on the riverbank, it would be working towards a conceptual design, trying to generate a list of preliminary permitting needs and costs and what a timeline would be. Interfluve would do a hydraulic study and survey, i.e. the riverside of the study, and BSC would do landside survey, and we do community outreach and discussion. Year two would be permit level design, actually applying for the permits, more community outreach and discussion. And year three would be construction with continued community outreach and discussion. So it would be a 3-year process before the project could be fully completed. The road flood and road future side is actually more complicated. The first year would be a feasibility study and preliminary alternatives analysis with some very preliminary conceptual road options generated so that the community could visualize what are we talking about, what are some of these options, and we'd be looking particularly for nature-based solutions. And basically, there are some potential futures. We brainstormed what could be the future for Pleasant Valley Road. One is business as usual, just you could have unplanned going forward, and that could lead to road abandonment eventually with, down a few decades out. Another thing would be to do some modifications at low points with a focus on nature-based solutions. So that could buy some time, push off the flooding problems. 3, another option is raise the road. And one component, what would that mean for driveways and accessing properties? 4 is relocating the road. Some pretty big obstacles to that in terms of permitting, impacts to wetlands, forests, and private property. 5, planned retreat. How would you plan abandonment of the road? Could property owners participate in FEMA property buyout viability? Community, a lot of community outreach and discussion, because none of these are the first choice, the first choice would be that the road doesn't need any attention, but unfortunately that's not the situation. Road assessment will require both state and federal roadway constraints assessment. It's a municipally owned road, but also has some constraints from state and federal that will, have to be considered. Legal considerations. A component could be assessing property valuations for cost-benefit analysis to feed into these different assessments of options and potential eligibility for FEMA funds. And then some scenario planning. And scenario planning means trying to figure out how the flooding related to climate change is going to increase in this location going forward. There is some state mapping that is supposedly imminently going to be made available to the public. It is not yet available, so we can't access it at this point in time. If that mapping gets delayed and it's really not going to be available for a while, another option is to get to look into working with Woods Hole Group, because they have done a lot of the modeling in Eastern Mass and they have a lot of the data, and they could, it would cost money, but they can do that kind of finer scale modeling for communities. And then a year 2 would be a much fuller alternatives analysis that would be dependent on the outcome of year 1. So you have these 5 things, and if people are not interested in one or another of the alternatives, then it might not make it to the next stage. Or if an assessment of the obstacles to doing one of those pathways are just so great that the obstacles cannot be overcome, then it would not move on to the full alternatives analysis. So the full alternatives analysis for those options that move forward, there would be a preliminary permitting assessment, preliminary cost analysis, looking at timelines and for design and implementation, and an evaluation of what partners and supplemental grant opportunities would be available, because just MVP funds might not be sufficient. Again, continued community outreach and discussion. And the goal for year 2 would be to identify a preferred alternative. After 2 years, hopefully there'd be a decision, a community-wide decision as to how do we want to go forward proactively. And then year 3, the preferred alternative, you could bring it to 25% design, advance the permit process, advance the cost analysis and the timelines, and continue to build those partnerships and set up the additional grant opportunities with continued community outreach and discussion. And obviously there would be more years after that, but planning for more than 3 years out is probably not the wisest thing. So we have a preliminary outline for 3 years. And so now we'll open this up for discussion.
If I may, Jillian,
Sure.
that was a tremendous amount of information, and we realize that. And
Yeah.
so the takeaway from this is really an introduction. We really want to immediately start to engage the community. So this is the first outreach that we've attempted to do this. It's a very complicated road and procedure to go through under MVP. It reminds me a lot of having dealt with a lot of heavy-duty environmental restoration and cleanups at different sites, including Superfund sites. It's almost the same way. So we really don't know exactly what all the problems are. So we need to sort of study that and get a grip on that, and then try to formulate some solutions, and then try to figure out how we would implement those solutions. So, and again, this is an open dialogue that goes back and forth between the community and the expertise that we've got on board, both in staff for the city and with BSC Group. And also, as all this stuff starts to swirl around, we've also got the usual pressures of other things that are happening in town. So there's development that's planned, there's things that need to change, there's infrastructure that needs to either be maintained or upgraded. So all these things now need to be looked at with the lens of the MVP and sort of the lens of climate change. I think climate change is usually this kind of big thing off in the corner that no one really understood. But as Jillian points out, we've now got the ability to sort of drill some of that data down to the local level. And since we're surrounded by water, we have to maintain the lakes and waterways. We've got to deal with the Merrimack River. We've got to deal with the influx of more rainfall. These things need to enter the equation as we move through and manage the municipality. So with that, and I want to put DPW Director Rob Dismaris on the hot seat, but if you could describe a couple of things that are physically going wrong with the road, just to give us a little update.
Jillian, can you bring us all back onto the screen?
Yeah, sure. There we go.
There you go. Rob, you still with us?
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of things that are happening out there right now and the erosion that you're seeing on a regular basis, can you just kind of describe that?
Yeah, so as the pictures show, and to be honest, they don't do justice to what it looks like out there. The bank of the river is severely undercut. The trees that overhang the river are kind of holding the soil together, but when they fail, they tend to tear the slope apart. In the past, when a tree fell, we'd put some stone in the hole that was made, and that would stabilize it to a certain extent. The latest thing we've done in the last few years was install some guardrail, specially designed guardrail to protect the cars on the road. But that is, somewhat a temporary measure that's only good until the next big tree falls. But that it does allow us to keep the road open. But that's pretty much the story up to now, other than trying to seek programs like this for funding.
And again, there's no silver bullet. So there's no one thing we can go, hey, we're going to go out here and do this, and we're done. And we can kind of walk away, because technically we don't even know kind of the parameters of the problem yet. So, and our core team members, Corey Riley and Alan Corey, you guys live out there all the time. So you're seeing the same kind of things that Rob sees, sort of more infrequently, I guess.
Yeah, well, I took a walk up to one of the sites past the Davy Jones Marina up there, and that bank is pretty much eroded away. I don't even know if it's got a couple of years before the water washes that out.
Yeah, down there we've done very little, and as you're all sort of aware, that the city actually owns, I don't think the city owns any of that property. It's all, we own a strip of land for the road down the middle, and generally the abutters to the road own property on both sides of the road. So it's all private property. So we've only been involved when the road itself is threatened.
Corey, did you want to say something from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think the point of this call is to make sure that everybody who hadn't heard anything about this project has a chance to ask questions. And as Tom mentioned, there's been a lot of information presented. I've lived along the Merrimack River since I moved to Amesbury 14 years ago, 2 different houses, but always within the sight of the river. So I've seen a lot of the same stresses happening to coastal properties, the riverfront properties. And I'm really happy that the town is being proactive about this, because if we think ahead and we plan ahead and we have these conversations before the next, big flood, then we'll be much more prepared to deal with it and make decisions that everybody's on board with. So I think that's the real point of this initial stage, is to do the type of background studies and conduct the type of community dialogue that will be needed to set us up for some longer term solutions. So I think that at this point, we wanted to hear from people who are on the call who live in the study area. Is that right, Jillian? Is it a good time to transition to that?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And just because, if you don't mind, I can tell people how to make sure that if you have a question, there are 2 places that you can sort of address that. If you go to the bottom of your screen and you press on participants, next to your name, you should have an option to raise your hand. The other way is to type into the chat box and have it sent to everyone. And I saw that Allie was manning the chat box earlier. So if you have questions, this would be a great time to ask the team.
Sounds kind of quiet.
So I see a note that says iPhone has raised their hand. So it's not saying a person's name, but so whoever's on an iPhone, go ahead and make your comment.
Okay, it's probably me, Patty Hoyt.
Okay.
At the beginning, it seems as though some people got a letter, and we live on Pleasant Valley Road, and we own land that abuts the river. So luckily, our neighbors informed us of this Zoom meeting, and we're very excited about this proposal. But it sounds like you need some letters from us. Can send me that information. I'll be happy to comply.
Great, thank you. Do you know if you're within the area that is shown on the?
Yes.
You are?
Mhm.
Okay, all right, great. We will make sure that you get the letter. Definitely.
Okay. Would you like me to send a message to somebody and send name
Yeah,
and address?
yeah, you could put in the group. Yeah, you could
Yeah.
contact the
Okay.
number also.
Send it
let-
off to me and use my work email, and we'll get the
Sure.
information
Thanks, Tom.
out there. And
Thank
part
you.
of how we compiled this was, again, looking at the study area. We went through our Jason, the tax assessor, to try to figure out exactly where everybody was. And we wish we could do the whole thing in one big swoop, but it's really kind of focused in one area for now. So that was about 20 to 30 or so letters that we sent out. But of course, again, we may have geographically missed you. So feel free to email me and we'll get you a letter.
Great. Thanks.
Patty, Ken Turner speaking. We just received a letter which came
For the
registered
group.
mail yesterday to us
Mhm.
with the forms in it.
Okay.
So I gave it to Joan and I gave one to Greg LaMontagne. And
Right. But
this
it's
was-
just where our land is independent, Ken, we should probably have our own letter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we
That's
have got,
okay.
of course, the Goodwin Creek Homeowners Association came to us yesterday. I guess they got rejected twice by the post office, so it finally did arrive.
Okay.
Also, Jillian, I do have one question for you, and that is, this is try to be positive. We attended a seminar series on the sturgeon in the Merrimack River, and there's a whole organization out there that's studying them. And just to make sure you don't trip over something, I hope that I don't know how you interface with them, but as you do riverbank or restoration or whatever, you don't want to have them coming after you about that.
Very good point. And yes, that would be one of the things. That's why we would be doing the assessment before the design and doing all the permitting, because doing those studies allows you to find out all those issues that we definitely don't want to impact species negatively that are species of concern. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That's a good point.
Ken, do you happen to know which group is doing that study?
Yes. We have that information at Lowell's Boat Shop.
Thank you.
Right. The scientist who's doing the study.
Patty, was that the gentleman that was on the boat ride with
Yes.
Senator Tizaglia?
Micah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey,
Anybody
guys.
else?
Yeah. Hi, guys. This is Bob Prokop from Merrimack Conservation. And I had monitored the bank restoration effort over in Haverhill, right behind the baseball stadium, if anybody's familiar with that. And if it's possible, I have a picture of what the site looked like last fall. If there's a chance I could switch over to display the picture. Is that,
Is that possible, Alexandria?
can I do what, share screen maybe, or?
You can try it and see if it allows it. Sure.
All right, let's see.
No, it said no, post disabled. No, that didn't work.
Okay, yeah, we disabled it. You can email it to me.
Let's try. Okay, that's not working either. Anyway, but basically, as much as I'm into a naturalized bank restoration effort, I don't think in the long run it's going to work because you mentioned like the trees fall over, as Rob Damaris mentioned, the trees fall over, they leave a big hole in the bank. And over in Haverhill, when they try to restore, I don't know, 500 feet of bank. In the picture that I have, which unfortunately I can't show you guys, they basically lined the whole bank with very large riprap. And then above that, they used core logs to stabilize the land immediately above it. And then they planted that to try to, establish a more naturalized cover. But I don't see a way to get around this other than effectively I know it's not going to be natural, but is riprapping the whole bank that's eroding. And that's what I said. I wish I could show you the picture. I don't know. I like to email it to. I don't know which one to send it to. Hold on.
You could send it to Ali Echandi, ECHANDI at B.
Yeah, Bob, I emailed you a couple of days ago, so my email should be in your inbox.
Which one? Who just spoke?
Ali from BSC.
Yeah, okay, wait a minute. I'm looking at my emails. I got Jillian. I got a lot of Jillians. Sorry. And I got a Tom. I got Tom.
Yeah, you got me.
Let's see.
You
Flip
could
it over.
Jillian.
Yeah, you
send it to
send it to
Jillian.
me.
All right, let me try this one. Let's see. I just got to do an attachment. Hold on a second. Reply. Let's see. Come on. Okay, attach. Give it a second here. Where are we? Sorry, it takes a bit.
It's okay.
You know how it is.
Yeah.
Let's see. Riverbank. Here we go. Which photo was that? 976.
And Jillian, the photo that you had in the presentation, was that Haverhill?
Yes, that was
Yeah.
Haverhill after the job was completed. Yeah.
Okay, I got the photo attached, but it won't let me attach it. Let's try this one. Okay, let me do this one. Choose.
I will say my first comments here won't be scientific at all, but this is like this whole process of dealing with COVID-19 and remote working is going to make us all experts in this technology. We're going to come out of this with just whizzes. My 7-year-old son has a full calendar of Zoom meetings all day, all week.
Okay, Jillian, I just sent you a picture.
Okay, I see it. Yep. All right. So I will. Okay.
I don't know if you can display it. I've got it displayed on my screen, but it's obviously not yours.
Yeah, I'm sharing now. Let's see. All right, I gotta move it.
Yeah, take your time. Took me a while too, so.
Okay. All right.
While you are pulling it up, Jillian, this is Casey Lee. I'm the landscape architect with BSC Group, and I do a lot of research and development on some of the alternative green solutions for these. And yes, there is a whole lot of experimentation still in implementing them. Working with living systems is always more complex. But there's also a certain amount of trying to do the same thing in the same spot. Sort of the obvious answers can be odious. So you really need a full understanding of the site and the physics around it, which is part of why working with Interfluve is going to be an important part of knowing the full velocities, and I'll work with plantings and life cycle on how to make these things more durable than they would be otherwise. Particularly on your site, you may need something that's very much a hybrid, the way that you've described, if you intend to save the road, at least the portion that's being undermined, because there isn't land for some of the more standard revegetation projects that people pursue.
Well, I believe what everybody can see, I think, is
Yeah.
is the bank stabilization they did over in Haverhill. This is a photo from last fall. And obviously, you know, they rip-wrapped the entire base of the bank. And then above the bank, they had a row of core logs with racemes of willow and dogwoods embedded in the core logs. And then above that, they did plantings, which you can't really see. It just shows grass. But I believe the area in Amesbury, just like in Merrimack, it's that section of the river that's on the eroding side of the river. And I don't know how you can do a natural. I mean, I'd love it to be naturalized. You know, I'd love that riprap to be all replaced with, you know, woody vegetation, blah blah blah, all the way down to the bottom of the bed. But I don't see how that's going to work. It looks like we're going to be kind of stuck with a solution of something similar to this. Obviously, we can keep an eye on Haverhill to see how well this is holding up over there. But this is, like I said, this is like 500 or 600 feet of bank that they rip-wrap the whole bank right behind the baseball stadium. Anybody can go down there and take a look at it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jillian, but we're sort of on uncharted territory, and that's part of the reason for, you know, going through MVP and going through this sort of initial study process, is to really kind of figure out exactly what is going on in this area, and then try to sort of feed that into the solutions bank and try to figure out how we can best tackle the problem. Again, I think that's what MVP wants to do, something in a unique way with the grant funds, so that can then be replicated, you know, somewhere else in the Commonwealth. So, Jillian, you got more to add to that?
Yeah. I was just saying that I think Casey Lee was right, that right now, the first stage is to do the studies, and we can't predict or point our finger at any one thing and say this is going to be the end result, because we don't know what the end result is until we understand the system better. And to understand the system, we have to do the studies on both the water side and the land side. And so I think it's premature to say this will or won't work. And I think we just have to follow the data, follow the science, and see, you know, there'll be a report that describes the velocities, the forces that have to be considered, the erodibility of the existing bank in terms of grain size and texture of the soil, and some modeling, whether we are able to download data that the state provides, or whether there's a need for some additional modeling from Woods Hole Group. We're going to have to figure out the piece of not just what are the current forces, but what are the forces going to be 10 years, 20 years down the road. So this is something that is sustainable over time. And there may be, I mean, I think there can be some components, like this got permitted in Haverhill, and it has some riprap in it. So it may be that there is some allowable amount of riprap in certain areas, but then the rest of it is more vegetated. So, but the point will be that we've really explored the nature-based solutions as much as possible and brought them in as much as possible. And I think we just have to follow the process and follow the science and follow the data. And so saying, you know, sort of getting into too much of a discussion about one specific end result or another, it's just very premature to at this point.
So I do see another question in the chat box that maybe we could have the team address, which says, can you discuss the flood map and why only 8 homes on Maudsley View Lane received the letter?
Discuss the flood map or the...
So why some houses on Maudsley View Lane, which is the cul-de-sac that comes up,
okay,
near the marina. So just bringing up that floodplain and going over the rationale for which houses were included in the study area,
Okay, let's
if I
see.
understand the question right. So
I'm gonna share the map again. Okay, is this the area that was being talked about? As to which, so some of the, Tom, can you,
Yeah, I think when, again, we're looking at
just,
sort of how to reduce the study area down, at least for the initial. Again, when we're looking at trying to how to deal with this kind of unwieldy thing, which is a number of private properties, a limited amount of funds that we're going to probably be able to ask for. We sort of tried to squeeze the project area down to a manageable amount. And that was, again, discussions among the core group and BSC group to come up with that list of people that we were going to send things out to. But again, holistically, we're looking at that entire system. And part of this initial study is going to lead us to how complex that system is and what the nuances are. Do we have to add over here, take away over there, at least again for the initial study? Is that sort of making sense?
oh, I think I understand what the question is. Can you all see my little hand on my computer screen hand that's going
Yes.
on? Okay. So these are the 8 houses that got the letter, and these houses that are closer to the road did not get the letter. The reason being that they're part of the, these houses are located within this area that is hydrologically connected. You see how this is all, they're surrounded by this lot here, that is part of this system. And so one way to relieve flooding is to create more flood storage space and look at natural areas. Are there any areas where we could increase flood storage? So they are abutting this property where we might consider some of those solutions, whereas these houses are outside that area. And like Tom said, we just couldn't at this point cover all the houses along Pleasant Valley Road.
Does that make sense to everybody?
I don't
As
know.
I-
Where would you create new flood storage?
We don't know. We don't know, and it might not be possible. But so we haven't been out on the ground. The first stage is these are just questions, and so we don't have the answers yet, and that's the reason for doing the studies.
But I think the only way the water gets to the area, like the cul-de-sac, is if, unfortunately, I have my cursor, but I don't, if you take your cursor and move it to the top, to the upper right, towards the right in about there, that's where the culvert is. So a little bit below that.
Right
Yeah,
here.
that's where the stream. So I believe that's the way the water would go from the river into this whole area. I forget what size culvert that is. Rob Damaris, you might know it if you're still there. Size pipe that is.
I don't off the top of my head.
Yeah, but I think it's a sizable pipe. I don't know, 24, 36-inch pipe maybe. And
So-
what controlling that outlet, if you had a control structure there, like a tide gate or something, that might prevent flooding of the area, upslope of that culvert, which is the floodplain area is showing. But again, I'm just throwing this out.
Right, but that you're down in the weeds, Bob. We appreciate that, though. But that's, again, one of the things that most likely will come out of the study, exactly what kind of infrastructure already exists there and whether or not it should be or can be augmented. So again, part of the initial thrust of this is like to get moving on looking at this stuff, which again, for most people on the call today, is the first time that they're hearing that we're even kind of examining this issue.
The other essential bit being that having the study arms you for the next round of getting state funding rather than having to cover the costs entirely on your own as a municipality to solve some of these.
Right.
I
And
just want to
again-
point out that there was a follow-up question on just explaining what it means to increase flood storage space.
Oh, okay, sure. So flooding happens up to a certain elevation in any given storm. And so if you create flood storage space, that could, for instance, be if in the past you have a floodplain and people have placed fill in the floodplain, you could restore the former floodplain elevation and remove the fill. And that space that the fill took up would then be newly created storage for a volume of floodwater that flows into that area. So that's one way to do it.
Yeah, but that's going to be minuscule. You know, someone fills in a 1,000 yards of floodplain and they restore 1,000 yards of flood storage. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket for something like this. I mean, you got to.
So we're focusing right now on making sure the landowners are comfortable with the investment, right? So we're all, right now, the whole meeting is about getting a grant so that we can study the area. And
Okay.
then we'll go through, you know, the suite of possible solutions based on
Right. And
collecting that data.
everybody on the call that's either on the Conservation Commission in past, present, people who are on the planning board all kind of understand that as we look at different projects, as we look at making sure that wetlands are not infringed on, that's kind of the rationale as to why we're doing that. And this part of the MVP lens kind of augments that, and it magnifies it even more, going, hey, you know, these things are super critical to the infrastructure that we've got in order to make sure that we maintain that flood storage capacity, if not be able to increase it. So does that make sense to the person that asked the question?
I'm not sure who asked the question.
So Greg asked the question. He's the one who was having trouble with his audio. So he's been putting in, his last comment was, since the letter didn't get sent to everybody, maybe create a single digital doc and resend it so that we can distribute it and get more support or more citizens to sign on. That was an idea.
Okay, we will, I'm writing that down.
Yeah, I think we definitely can look into that. And again, part of the rationale as to sort of trying to keep this smaller and tighter was the more the COVID-19 response. Had we been done this in City Hall in a large scale sort of open meeting, I think it would have been a larger volume of people, and we could have probably just sent it out to everybody in town. But we can do more support would be great. The more support we have, the better off I think we're going to be for chances at the grant. So we'd be more than happy to do that.
And I see that David Frick has his hand up as well.
Oh, well, thank you. The only thing I wanted to bring up is just what you talked about. I think the people that didn't get the letter, the way you had that map up there, Jillian, before, a lot of properties that border Pleasant Valley Road on the front of their property and on the back border the Goodwins Creek area, that's the study area, didn't get the letter from you folks. And, you know, I'm in that area that's kind of circled in the back there of Maudsley View Lane. But, you know, so we border that area, and the people that border it on the other side kind of, I think, are wondering, well, hold it, you know, we would like to show you that we're interested and want this to happen too, and be able to help you out by getting the letter.
Okay.
So that's all.
Well, thank you. That's a good idea.
The more support we have, the better it is, I think. The more people we have, and more people will understand that if they put fill down near the river or in a flood area, that it's going to cause somebody else to have a flood. Now, a lot of people don't understand that. And you could see some people just dumping fill along the river in some places.
Good point. Good point. I see Greg LaMontagne raised his hand. Do you want to go ahead and say something?
Greg is the one who had trouble with his audio, so he was doing things in the chat box.
Okay. I don't see, I think we've discussed his comments already that are in the chat box. I don't see any new ones.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
When would all this begin? When will this
Well,
begin?
well, we are, in order to apply for the grant, we have to submit a complete proposal by June 11th.
That's right. Okay.
And
That's right.
so it's just that we're at the very beginning of all this and just at the point of drawing up the proposal. But before we do that, we need to understand if there's community support for this or not. And that's from the homeowners. And so, yeah.
Any chance you could expand it slightly into Merrimack? With the road
Yeah, we looked at that. We had a sort of sub conversation after we talked to you, Bob, and you need to be an MVP community first.
Okay.
Before I think we can lock arms and sort of walk together. So
Right.
I think, and again, I think we'd help you on that if we can. So at the city of Amesbury level, if there's something that we can do to make a better case for you to do that with your folks. And again, any of the work that we've done already, especially with BSC Group and getting the whole thing kicked off, everything's online, and we'd be more than happy to give you a hand.
Well, never hurts to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, we did have a plan, and I don't know how long ago. This goes back 10 years to try to stabilize the bank off of River Road, which is now closed off. And I tried to get our conservation agent to see if he could pull off the old plan that we had, and then we approved it. The commission approved it, but then it never went. The project never went anywhere. I don't know whether it was no funding or not. So.
Yeah, most likely, my guess would be lack of funding. So we're again, hopefully this MVP program is continued even in the aftermath of the whole COVID-19, and we can continue to move and apply and get more action grants. What's the maximum action grant, Jillian? Is a couple $100,000, I think.
No, it's actually 2 million for a single community and 5 million if it's more than one community together. But obviously you have to have a project that warrants those kind of dollars. So.
And again,
I do have a question about that, the funding, because of the COVID-19 situation and the state, and all the money that's going out. Are these funds still available, or will they be available? Do we know anything about that?
Well, what we know is that they issued the RFP for fiscal year 2021 last week, which was a month into this COVID-19 thing. So they issued the RFP knowing full well that the economy is being stressed, which to me says they're intending to go forward with it. I mean, of course, anything could change at any time, but we also know that Governor Baker is highly supportive of this program. It's a flagship program for him because he's the governor who signed the Global Warming Solutions Act and kicked it all off. So we know it's a priority, and right now they're not indicating any cutbacks for fiscal year 2021. I don't know, maybe it'll be a different story in fiscal year 2022. We don't know. Nobody knows that far out in the future. So.
I've been on calls all week for other grants. So Green Communities, of which Amesbury is also a part. We've won over $750,000 over the last couple of years. And we just put in for about another $160,000 in this grant round, which we just completed yesterday and turned that in. I had a conference call this morning about solid waste issues, and looks like there's still at least accepting applications for that. So as far as we can see, everything is moving forward. Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Secretary Katie Theohydres put out a statement over the weekend that was on LinkedIn supporting all the projects and the programs that were created under Governor Baker. So as far as we can see, everything is moving forward. So again, the critical component for us as the sort of applicants is to stay in line, get the paperwork done, get everything into the state so we don't, again, lose our position in what we want to accomplish. And again, everything that Jillian, people you've talked to at the state level, people I've talked to at the state level, all sort of like the direction that Amesbury's been going in, and in particular, this Pleasant Valley Road project really seemed to have them perk up in terms of looking at our community for going in a positive direction.
Yeah, we've talked with the MVP regional coordinator, and just to get to sound her out and say, is this reasonable? Is this something that could get funding? Not that they can make any promises, but is it in the ballpark? And they were enthusiastic. They said, yeah, this definitely sounds like a thing that could get funding. So
Terrific. Stay, can I ask one more question? This is David. In regard to this people that didn't get the paperwork, could we just send that letter to all of our neighbors and let them return it to you?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's a generic template letter, and you're free to share the cover letter with them. And the generic template letter will work for anybody, so you can share it as widely as you'd like. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
And again, I think Greg asked that question as well. And Greg, you've got a distribution list for, I guess, your homeowners association. So yeah, feel free to send that to everybody.
Guys, just as the last comment, when Mel Gibson did a film, Edge of Darkness, I don't know if anybody saw it. There was a scene where they had a car go into the river, and we got them to contribute or donate a $5,000, and we designated it strictly for work along the Merrimack River, which if we can use that to maybe get some of your work into Merrimack at all. But we got $5,000 that's just sitting in the bank doing nothing. It's not a lot for something like this, but it's a start. So
yeah,
just
good to know. Good to know.
Just compliments of Mel Gibson. So.
It looked like John Lopez was trying to talk, but maybe was muted. I don't know, John. I can see you. It looks like you were talking to us, but but we can't hear you.
Come on, there he is. I see him.
There you go, John.
Just a comment and a question. I remember after the Mother's Day storm, there was a public meeting that Rob, the DPW director, held. And it was a serious discussion on what to do with Pleasant Valley Road. And it was a serious consideration.
Uh-oh, we're losing you, John. We lost you again.
No?
Now we got you back. We can hear you again.
There you go.
About what to do with Pleasant Valley Road after the Mother's Day storm. And I remember the discussion kind of revolving on whether to close it down or not. And would the road be able to support the weight of heavy vehicles, such as oil delivery vehicles? So a lot of the information that Jillian presented was projecting into the future. But as a reminder, part of this conversation took place 10 years ago, about 10 years ago. So it's not something that's happening or may happen in the future. It's something that kind of sort of happened 10 years ago. So that's something that we have to be aware of. Jillian, so securing the permission to access the property from the property owners remains to that proposal. So what are our next steps for those that we did not reach tonight?
Okay, I think sharing, anybody who can share the letters with your neighbors who didn't get it, that is very, very helpful. And then, I think the city needs to, we can coordinate after the call to figure out how to figure out who did not get it. Yeah, and some of that is, I know some letters have come back, so we can look at the letters that have already come back and see which houses have not returned letters and maybe reach out to the one.
Right. Everything at Michael Jewell's suggestion, everything was sent out a certified mail. So the properties just didn't receive it yet. But that, I guess, will be our next step.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ones that did come back, we actually had Kristen Eldridge from our office actually physically went out and taped them to people's doors so we could track them down. So we thank her for her efforts doing that. Okay, any more questions?
I just wanted to make sure people saw the note in the chat box to send if the slides are available, to make them available to Councilor Lennon. And I also had a quick suggestion. It sounds like for a lot of people, it would be easier to share a digital copy of the letter rather than a paper copy. So maybe there's a place that we could post it on the MVP section of the town website, just so everybody on this call knows where to go and find a digital copy of the letter. Is that possible?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, great.
And we can post that on regular social media through our communication director too. So we can send that out through our Facebook account too.
Great.
Good.
Okay.
Anything else to add, Mayor?
No, thanks again for all the work that we've, that the group has put into the this presentation and the scope of what this project might look like. And I look forward to seeing it move forward. Thanks to the homeowners and our residents for joining us tonight and for all of the participation that we expect moving forward on this one.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Good seeing you all. Yep.
All right. Good to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Stay
Bye.
safe, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Be safe. Wear your masks.
Leave the meeting.